So if your bank lets you make a payment now from your phone and it's instant, particularly, you should really expect them to kind of ask you what you're doing and give you a warning, even if it's a kind of decision tree rather than a human or a chatbot. It's just got to be something that's in the moment. So those sort of warnings that are reactive to what you're doing are starting to be quite prevalent now and widespread in the UK, and they are effective.
We're going through something absolutely historic.
Technologies across the board are growing exponentially.
It's a disruption that's going to completely redefine the way businesses compete.
In the next decade, we're going to lose 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies.
The exponential growth of computing is continuing.
AI is nowhere near its full potential.
Whether you like it or not, that the future cannot be stopped by anyone.
Welcome back to the Future Tech and Foresight podcast. I'm your AI host, Mark Verbenkov's deepfake avatar, and this is episode number 198. This episode explores how scams and fraud tactics have evolved alongside modern banking technologies. From the shift from store cards to credit cards, to the impact of chip and PIN and real-time payments, the discussion reveals how each innovation opened new opportunities for criminals. We examine why scam losses have now surpassed card fraud losses, the growing sophistication of voice cloning scams, and the global origins of different fraud types. The conversation also covers how AI is being deployed to improve fraud detection, the ongoing need for human oversight, and proactive measures like gamified fraud education, dynamic payment warnings, and refund considerations. At the heart of it all is a focus on how education and awareness remain the most effective defense. Jason Costain is a fraud troubleshooter and the founder of Javlok, a boutique fraud consultancy that provides specialist fraud advice. Jason has spent 30 years fighting fraud, building and leading successful banking fraud defense teams for some of the world's biggest banks. Jason specializes in fraud defense systems, scam prevention, biometric authentication, big data, and artificial intelligence. His opinions have featured in the Daily Telegraph, Forbes magazine, the Wall Street Journal, and the Times. Javlok provides fraud and scam prevention advisory services to banks, global consulting firms, and fraud defense software investors.
Hi there, Jason. Thank you very much for joining the podcast today to talk about fraud and security in the financial sector, which I don't think I've had more than one other guest come on to talk about this, and that was way in the past. So I'm looking forward to hearing the updates and kind of really what's going on in the world of this industry. So thanks for coming on.
Hey, you're welcome. I'll do my best to I'll pass it with fun.
Right on. As we mentioned before the recording, the first question I like to ask guests is, how you got involved in the work that you're doing today. If there was like a specific event, or if it was just kind of an organic movement into this work. Just always kind of curious to see how the guests have moved into the work.
Yeah, no, sure. I've always worked in banking and come across fraud from time to time, but I worked at one particular card issuer in the UK who, up to that point, it was a store card, so you could use your card in their shops. So one of the biggest retailers, most well known in the UK, is a store called Marks and Spencer, in high-end retail, and they had 7 million store card customers. And the bank decided it really needed to convert them to a credit card, a MasterCard. So that meant we were going to go from store detectives and transactions that would be buying goods in our shops to global transactions and in any types of goods and services. So we had to migrate around about 3 million of those customers from a store card, which was quite safe, to a credit card, which was incredibly high risk in comparison for a bank. So that meant we needed to set up our fraud defenses, and I kind of got asked to help do that. And the rest history, really. That was 25 years ago. So yeah, that was and a big project, and sitting there waiting for our first fraud transaction to arrive was pretty exciting.
Interesting. Did maybe from my own curiosity, like, what was the scale of fraud that started to, like, I'm assuming, as you said, there was a higher risk. Did the fraud like dramatically jump as soon as that system was implemented?
Well, actually, we'd taken some advice from MasterCard, and I think the danger was we were going to be attacked because we were new kids on the block, and we were issuing 3 million pieces of plastic in the post over a 6-week period. So that itself was a significant opportunity. So we started right from the beginning of where do these pallets of plastic cards, payment cards, get into the postal system? How do we make activation of the cards secure so that we could make sure they got to the right people? So mail intercept was a big thought process. And then beyond that, it was just transaction monitoring and screening. And thanks to the help of MasterCard and other consultants, we kind of headed off some of the bigger problems. So the stuff we started to see was a gradual kind of flow of card not present fraud losses, which is where your card details have been stolen. So it takes a while to get through into the criminals' hands, because people need to, at that point in time, use their cards to buy stuff, and then say the guy in the restaurant, your waiter, would be skimming card details, and so it takes weeks rather than days. So it was really good that we avoided some of the big spectacular losses I've seen elsewhere, because the bank at the time had invested a lot of money in defence. So it was a great, sorry to say, not an exciting story, but it was a great example of how to get it right.
Right. And just for my own curiosity here, why the switch if these internal cards were safe, or you said that they were significantly safer? Is it just easier for customers to use a credit card? What was the reason for the switch?
Oh, it was commercial. I mean, it totally commercial. The store at the time, it had they didn't, believe it or not, this Marks and Spencer did not accept a credit card from any other organization to be used on the store.
Okay.
So, and the financial services arm was separate. So, it was kind of like, we're never going to accept credit cards in our stores, and we're going to offer our store card. And actually, they had a really bad trading year and realized that they needed to start accepting credit cards from elsewhere. I mean, it sounds surprising, doesn't it, that a store would ever use a method of payment, but in those days they did. And that meant that we had probably about a year a warning to convert the book, which was going to die, because we knew that once people didn't need to use our card, they'd start to use others. So there's an opportunity to create a credit card business from scratch, and ultimately it was sold by Marks and Spencer for £1.2 billion, which is a big deal, and that was the value of the book, was the ability to take 2-3 million of your store card customers, move them to a credit card, and then the bank was able to sell that and make a lot of money out of it. So it was probably one of the more lucrative areas of retail that Marks and Spencer had ever been involved with. They sold it ultimately to a bank, HSBC.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's dive into this fraud and protection idea as the main topic for today. So, I think what I like to do at the start of episodes is to try and get like a little bit of context for what we're going to be talking about, right? So, my wheel of expertise is not fraud and prevention. You've been in it for a while. How have things changed, say, well, you said 25 years. So how have things changed? I'm assuming that there's been quite a significant evolution in both, scammers as well as the type of protection tools that have been employed by the industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's been fascinating to watch, and just advances in technology have probably been the biggest changes. So, card fraud was always there. Check fraud was a thing that's gone down in the UK because check usage had decreased. But what the significant changes really have been, cards used to have a mag stripe on the back, well, they still do, but they didn't have a chip, which meant that data wasn't encrypted. So criminals could skim the card number and, clone a card and use it on either side of the world within seconds. Whereas once chip and pin came in, which in the UK was 2000, well, Europe was 2005, 6 maybe, I think, then that meant there was a whole technical improvement in sort of encryption and security. So that made significant differences to fraud losses in a good way. The next big change was really in the UK, at least, the advent of real-time peer-to-peer payments. So you could send an instant payment to someone else with a bank account in the UK, and that was 2008. And that kind of came hand in hand with the emergence really of online banking. So, that's taken a while to grow, but and everybody now has a smartphone. So what's happened since 2007, 2008 is, most people in the UK who've got a bank account now have the ability to send their life savings to somebody else from the comfort of their own home, and you couldn't actually do that. 15, 20 years ago, you had to go to the branch, you had to write a check maybe instead. It would take maybe 3 days, 4 days. And in that time, if you're going to be scammed, you'd probably think, am I doing the right thing? So, that advent of sort of real-time payments creates an opportunity for criminals, and that's what's exploded. So in the UK since 2018, banks were required to record their scam losses. This is where somebody makes their own payment to a criminal. So they've been duped, really. And very quickly, very, very quickly. And I've been running a fraud team for a bank. My biggest problem stopped being card fraud and became scam losses. And that happened in 2021. So, that was the first year really that APP fraud, authorized push payment fraud losses, exceeded card fraud losses. So anyone listening to this who works for a bank in the US particularly, you need to look at the size of your cards fraud prevention department and think you need to be employing at least that many people and that much kind of resource focus on scam prevention, because your customers are being, butchered, hence the expression, pig butchering scams. So the losses outstrip the bank's losses. Often.
So interesting. And also to put things into scale, into context, what's the size or what's the scale of like consumer fraud versus commercial or business fraud? I would assume that commercial or consumer fraud would vastly outstrip the size of business and commercial fraud, right?
Yeah, I mean, if the UK is anything to go by, you're looking at a kind of 5-to-1 loss difference. So, 100 million for business, typically 500 million for personal customers. Businesses often don't report all of their fraud losses, so you can kind of expect that that the business losses will be bigger, but ultimately, in the UK at least, the losses from individuals are dwarfing those of business. I mean, really, because every bank individual customer represents we each represent a target to a criminal, whereas a business is one target. There might be many people, there might be layers of defense. So businesses have become a little bit more savvy to scams, and then criminals have really realized how they can monetize fraud attacks on individual victims. So scams are often either driven by desire or fear. And, criminals come in from those angles. It's the desire might be, I want to invest in something, make a lot of money out of crypto, for example. Fear might be, the police are calling, my bank account is being raided, I need to help the police to stop this. Those factors are used by criminals to really kind of create a sense of urgency and get people doing things they might otherwise not do. I mean, the amount of victims I've spoken to who've said, I was so wrapped up in it and it was lasting several hours, and then only after I'd sent the payments and my wife came home from work and I told her what had happened, and I kind of had that head slap moment and thought, what have I done? So quite often that's the kind of cognitive load you've been put under as a victim, is being kind of convinced to do things. And it's fascinating and highly skilled from criminals to do that, and unwitting victims, unfortunately.
And what about the geography of the scammers in particular? Whenever you go on social media, you get these little videos of probably some IT guy who's very, very knowledgeable on how all these things work, and they're trying to scam the scammer or waste the scammer's time. Is that a good representation of where the scammers are coming from? Are these scam centers in India the largest, or other places in the world? Are these the largest perpetrators of scams, or is it more like a local base where the scammers are? We're obviously talking about the UK, but I guess this could go I'm in Canada and the States, etc. Right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm aware of what's going on for other countries. I mean, typically you see romance scams and blackmail scams. So teenagers with, sharing images online with somebody,
Right.
and then being blackmailed. That's kind of coming out of West Africa and Nigeria in particular. you see in Myanmar, kind of Burmese Thai border, where you've got these big scam centers that seem to be focused on the US and pig butchering scams. That's high volume outbound calls, just speaking to potential victims. You've also got kind of state-sponsored or tolerated kind of scams. These days, more technical. So the Russians, particularly, are very adept. Can take over and PC, hacking and that kind of stuff. But I've got to say that the scam victims I've spoken to who've suffered the bigger losses, I've heard a voice that's been in their native tongue, and when I've heard them, because occasionally I've been able to speak to the scammers myself, it's a British voice. It's not a foreign voice pretending to be, or a US accent or whatever accent. You can't just rely on, I don't know, a voice from say the subcontinent and think, well, they sound Indian. I'm a little bit suspicious because I've heard of these scam centers coming from India.
Right.
What would you do if you got a voice that was, clearly US high school, sounds like you? And that's the danger in future with AI, I guess, and voice cloning, which is some way off, I've got to say. But that kind of naturalized voice coming from somebody who sounds like you is far more plausible than a voice that sounds like it's coming from a call center in Asia, which is where some of these scams emanate. But yeah, all over the globe, it seems, and it's kind of focused on different types of scams. It just depends what the specialism is. So yeah, it's a global problem. But for me, the most problematic ones have been the voice that sounds like yours.
Yeah. Yes. So two questions from there. Has there been, are you starting to now see an increase of these voice cloning scams? And are there seasons of scams? Is there one specific type of scam that happens for I don't know, a year or 6 months and then it switches? Or how does it work essentially? It's very, very interesting.
There is a bit of a seasonality too. So for example, you'll see banks trying to educate the customers on purchase scams just before Christmas or Black Friday, because people are looking for great deals online. You see people around Valentine's Day getting warned about romance scams, and you see people before kind of big ticketing events getting warned about, ticketing scams, for example. So there's generally a little bit of seasonality, but what you also see is just criminals taking advantage of certain media stories. So for example, during COVID, we saw a lot of scams that were focused on vaccinations and trying to impersonate government. And that might be vaccination scam one year. It might be a scam relating to a big Olympics every 4 years. It's just right. They will look for an event and they'll jump onto the criminals are really adept at developing the latest sort of attack vector based on new, and so you'll see disasters and then you see criminals coming in off the back of that, which is appalling. But they're very, very speedy to change their sort of method of attack.
Yeah, very innovative people, huh?
Yes, yeah, and there's no controls.
Yes,
there's no governance committee. There's no law-abiding citizens or policing. It's just, what can we try tomorrow? Does it work? If it works, they'll attack again and again and again.
I see. And the amount of AI scams, or the voice cloning scams, you mentioned it. Is that starting to work now? Is there?
It's kind of grabbing headlines, but it's not really a huge issue. I think some of the scams that you might have seen. So there was a reasonably well-known kind of scam where this criminals impersonated a CEO of a company or of the finance director, tried to clone the voice and create payments or get the staff to authorize payments. But if you think about that, a lot of effort went into targeting that individual and to exploiting that firm and the staff within it. So the chances of you as a average consumer being targeted by a voice clone that is, somebody is requires a lot of effort. And what is the potential reward? It might be nothing. So I think we're a way off seeing kind of low level voice cloning scams. What you might see more of is voices that are changed to sound less like they're coming from from Chinese or Burmese voices, and they sound westernized or American. And, that I think that's probably the first application of the tech that we'll see on a bigger scale. Currently, AI is being used to help spoof documents. So classic kind of faking of driver's licenses and stuff like that. And then just the final thing with anyone who banks with a bank that uses voice biometrics, which I do, and then in the UK, several banks have adopted that, and in Australia too. I'm not quite sure in the US if it's a big thing yet, but that technology, the bank isn't just listening for your voice, and it doesn't just recognize your voice pattern. It's looking for the phone line you're coming in on. It might be actually able to see the device you're using. It might be also able to tell if there's metadata behind the incoming phone call. So it might be able to see if it's VoIP. Do you normally use VoIP? Is it coming from overseas? Is it coming from a domestic landline? Is it coming from a cell phone? So all those factors are used on top of the kind of voice screening. So banks are, say, a step ahead of the voice cloning issue. Those who use the tech, us as mere consumers, won't know we're being phoned by someone who's using voice changing technology. In the old days, it was pretty mechanical and you could tell, whereas now I think it's a lot more realistic.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Should we get into what you can do to prevent and solve some of these things, both at like the bank level and the individual level?
Yeah.
I think this is like an episode that is very practical, or it can be quite practical for individuals actually listening.
Yeah, and what I wanted to do really today was just talk about what UK banks have been doing, and it's been a hard battle, but since 2018, the UK banks were required to capture scam loss data. So, I think in a lot of countries now, banks don't even record how much their customers are losing. And on a daily basis, people ring up and say, I think I've been scammed to send a payment yesterday. It was $20,000. Can I get my money back? And, the bank might say hard luck, but what the bank won't do is record that loss, and it definitely won't think about refunding you. Whereas in the UK, banks have been recording the losses and considering refunds since 2018 at least. So that you've got 6 years worth of losses, which have been piling up in UK banks that have driven significant investment. So I think it's worth talking about what UK banks are doing now to protect their customers. As a consumer, therefore, should you expect your bank to do to protect you? I think that's quite an interesting sort of way to look at it. So in the UK now, I was thinking about it earlier, Mark, and I think education, the measurements of scam losses, prevention and detection, authenticating customers. How do you know it's you? How do you know it's the bank? And how do you recover your losses and deal with that with your bank? They're all topics that people should hear about. And so getting into it. So education, for example, proactive and reactive. So reactive education might be, you make a payment, and in the UK now, the bank will say, even online, what's the payment for? You'll be given a choice of, is it for an investment? Is it for paying a friend, family? Is it for paying an invoice? Is it for something else? And you will be given scam advice based on the purpose of payment. So that kind of dynamic payment warning, depending on what you're trying to do, is now very commonly used in the UK and starting to be used in other countries. So if your bank lets you make a payment now from your phone and it's instant, particularly, you should really expect them to kind of ask you what you're doing and give you a warning, even if it's a kind of decision tree rather than a human or a chatbot. It's just got to be something that's in the moment. So those sort of warnings that are reactive to what you're doing are starting to be quite prevalent now and widespread in the UK, and they are effective.
They are effective. Yeah,
they are. Yeah, I saw one bank in Australia was claiming that they'd seen $50 million worth of payments abandoned in a 3 or 4 month period by customers who received the warning. What you never know as a banker is, why did you abandon the payment? You're assuming it's because there was a warning. It might just be because the doorbell rang.
Sure.
No, but I did similar analysis a few years ago in the bank I worked at when we implemented this stuff in 2020, and a lot of those customers who abandoned the payments after we gave them a warning never came back and made it. So you got to think that was an indication they were being scammed, and they changed their mind. So that's those warnings can be effective, and of course, Australian banks claiming that's a great initiative and innovative and telling me about that in the newspaper last year. I was thinking, other countries have been doing this for 4 or 5 years. What's took you so long? And I don't know, Australia and Canada, America and Canada, I think some banks are still to implement this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
What's really interesting is now in education, you're seeing some banks doing proactive gamification of fraud education. So I don't know whether you might have in the US, say, or Canada, where you can go online and check your credit score. Do you have those kind of apps?
I know they do in the States. I think we do here. I haven't been looking.
Well, you can kind of go on and you can say, what's my credit score, and you can get tips on how to improve it, and you can see your score going up all the time. Banks now are starting to offer education to the customers through the banking app. So you might get, when you go into your banking app to check your bank balance, you might get, check your fraud score. You can go online to see, what your fraud score is, and it might say 0 out of 5, but then it'll say how to improve it. And it might be, do you realize you can reduce your payment limits? So you might reduce your payment limit. You realize you might want to hear about the latest scam losses and scams we're seeing. So you maybe have 1 minute, 2 minutes training. You've done that. You might also get given, other controls that you can change on your account. So maybe switch off foreign payments, for example. Once you've done those things, your fraud score starts to go up. So it's kind of a little game really, but trying to incentivize training. So I think as consumers, you should expect to get some kind of warnings in your payment journey. You should expect to be challenged when you're making payments, particularly high value, that's instant payments. And, you should start to see training, which is more interactive and fun and meaningful to you, rather than just, beware of a deal that's too good to be true. That stuff doesn't stick.
So we're seeing this kind of as a top-down push, right? It's really the banks, along with the apps that they have, that are pushing these kinds of trainings and warnings that are happening from people. I don't know if there's even any way to judge this, but are you seeing just like general awareness, or like a greater awareness from the bottom up, where people are, they are going on social media and they're seeing these scammers, and they're becoming more aware of what's the famous one, the Nigerian prince scam, right? So I think, everybody's heard of that. And is there like just a greater awareness that these type of scams are happening and that they're evolving and that you should be a little bit more aware?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's indications that people are picking up on stuff, but ultimately, it's the scam and fraud prevention is layers, and some of the education will stick, some won't. So, I mean, the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK has done some great research on victims, and some amazing stats that if you're deemed vulnerable, and that might be financially vulnerable, it might be health reasons, it might be incapacity, mental incapacity. There might be reasons why you're vulnerable. And when the FSA did surveys in the last few years, 49% of the UK population is vulnerable at any given time. When you're vulnerable, you are, I think the stats says something like 10, 12 times more likely to fall victim to a scam. So what that says to me is there's a hell of a lot of vulnerable people out there. You're significantly more likely to fall victim of a scam if you're just unlucky enough to be approached at that time. And it doesn't matter how many times someone might tell those people to beware of a deal that's too good to be true, or your bank will never phone you and ask for X, Y, Z information in the heat of the moment, in that crisis event you're going through in your life. And when you get that plausible call, you're going to fall for it. So there is evidence that people are becoming more aware. But ultimately, scammers are opportunistic, and it's pretty much every scam victim I've spoken to has been going through some crisis at the time you got approached. So, for example, I helped some victims in November last year. They were friends of friends. Got a text message one day saying, "Jason, how do you tell if it's your bank phoning you?" And as a fraud manager, I'm thinking, "Oh, no way. I don't apply to this." So straight away, do not send any money. I'll give you a call as soon as you can. So 10 minutes later, I was speaking to them, and they'd already sent £90,000 that day, 3 payments. The victim's brother was receiving palliative care for cancer treatment, and their best friend had just come out of hospital having had a stroke. So, and they got a phone call literally the day after. So this is happening in the moment. They're already, at the wit's end in terms of sleepless nights, stress, worry. And they get a phone call saying it's from the bank. We're just checking an innocuous transaction. We know the last 4 digits of your card number. You want to go through ID. They even created fake letterhead for that bank, and they spoofed the email address so it looks similar. They used all the same routines the bank would to go through. So it sounded plausible. And then just at the end of the call, it was, okay, thanks. We just confirmed that transaction's not you, so we'll block your card for you. And it was, oh, we just noticed a payment's going out for £1,500 to an account in Portugal. Is that you? And straight away, you panic. So you got somebody thought they were speaking to the bank, then they panic. And then it was a kind of help us protect your funds type scenario. And that's what led them to send in £90,000. Once I got involved and they reported to the bank and all the right things, it was amazing how sophisticated it was and how plausible it was and how unlucky they were given the crisis they were going through in their personal life. And because of UK rules, they were refunded in full 2 weeks later. Sadly, their brother had died in that time. So when people say scam victims are idiots, to think about you and your loved ones and moments of crisis in your life and just how equipped would you be or would they be to deal with a scam at the worst possible time. Because, there's 60, 70 million people in the UK, 6, 7, 800 million population in the US. You, at any given time, somebody's going to be going through some life event that's really difficult. And the Nigerian prince one you mentioned is a great example, but the reason some people speculate that they are so obvious is that most people would spot it. So therefore, if you're a scammer and you're sending 100,000 emails out pretending to be a Nigerian prince and you get 4 responses, you can bet your bottom dollar the 4 people who've responded are vulnerable. So in a way, it's a self-selecting, almost designed to the obvious scam attack that will filter out all the genuines. Why do you want people who, sorry, not genuines, filter out all the people who are going to be dubious? Why do you want to speak to them? It's a waste of your time. So create a obviously sort of fraudulent message that most people would spot. And the people who don't spot it, they fail to spot it for a reason. They're really busy because they're just coming out of hospital and the daughter's not been well for 3 weeks, or, maybe they've got some other disability and they can't understand. But what you're going to get is the respondents are going to be the ones you want to speak to.
Wow. So how does AI filter into this? Is it going to, I guess it's going to do both. No, it's going to help the scammers identify people that are in more vulnerable situations. And it might help banks and individuals defend against the potential scammers. Like, I don't know how the scammers understood that this, your friend of a friend was going through, multiple crisis scenarios during that time, but I'm assuming they got that call because they were able to figure that out. I don't think it would just be happenstance, no?
Well, you know what, they lived, Google Earth is a great tool. So if you're a scammer, let's do it now, Mark, right? So we've got some data. We can go into the dark web. We can buy data on potential victims. If we do scams, we might as well make sure we get people with decent money. Okay, let's narrow this down now. People with a large chunk of money, they're going to be 60s and 70-year-old. They're going to be, into the retirement pension pot. They're sitting there. They're probably going to live in leafy suburbs, so that's a data analysis challenge. So criminals have been really good at aggregating data and doing victim profiling. So they already knew, I think, from the victims I'm talking about, that they lived in a leafy suburb. They knew their ages. They were in the 70s. I don't think that they would have been able to profile them on, the issues they were facing in their lives. But I don't doubt that in some scenarios, for example, bank staff are known to be approached by organised crime. If I was wanting to recruit to get hold of scam victim accounts, I would be saying to bank staff, right, I'll pay you £50 a time for the account and personal details of a customer who's got more than $100,000 on deposit. I want to know this information. And, I want them to be aged over 70 and living in these areas, so, and anything else you can tell me. And, if you're working for an organized crime gang, and if you're maybe getting paid some kind of share of the profits, why wouldn't you cherry pick the more vulnerable people you come across? So I'm not saying that happens frequently, but it would not surprise me if criminals haven't already infiltrated banks and doing that. And you see it as well in parcel delivery scams. I ordered some clothes online for school clothes for the kids, and I got loads of really good comms, which was actually a pain in the ass, from the retailer saying, we've received your order, we're going to process your order, we'll tell you when we've handed it to our courier. And then I got another email, we've handed it to the courier, and the courier's name, and they use this courier name, a well-known one in the UK. And then I get a message from the courier, we've received your goods from, the retailer. We'll let you know when the goods are delivered. We will send you tracking information. Then I got another one, your goods are being dispatched, your goods are on the way. And I got all these flurry of text messages, and it all was quite good, I suppose, but actually it was just a pain because I was trying to work from home. It was difficult.
Right.
And then next thing, the doorbell rang, and it's delivered. Thought, great. Well, they said it would be delivered today. It's been delivered. It's in my hand. I went back to my computer to start work again, and I get the next text message saying, we were unable to deliver your parcel. And it was saying and it was using the same name as the delivery company that was genuinely had just delivered the parcel. So if you think about the amount of people in the chain of who has back office access to the online orders that customers make, and that might be a third party, not just people who work for the retailer, who in the the sort of dispatch of goods depart warehouse has access to name and address stuff, who in the delivery company has information like that, and even down to the delivery driver. Any one of those people could be just selling data to criminals. And somebody in that chain knew that I was about to receive a parcel. It was just lucky that I'd received that 5 minutes earlier. If they'd have been 10 minutes sooner, I'd have got a text from them saying, we've been unable to deliver. And I'd have thought, you know what, click here. It was a classic click here.
Right.
And they would have been asking for my payment card details and whatnot, but it ultimately would have been used to scam me. But there's so many leaks in the bucket that criminals will have infiltrated it. And there's no reason why you couldn't start speaking to pension providers as a criminal gang, or banks, and targeting high net worth individuals who just retired. I had an Australian scam victim I spoke to contacting me out of the blue, asking for help. He just retired. He's a retired head teacher, and he'd sent 330,000 Australian dollars to what he thought was an investment bond to the state of Victoria. And he'd retired 2 months earlier. So, coincidence, or somebody who worked in the school, in the pension provider, in the bank. But if I was a criminal, make it easy for yourself. Go after those kind of leads.
So it seems like on the attack side of things, there's still a big need for human in the loop, right? Whether it's this infiltration or gathering the data in that sense. Scary to think about. What about on the protection side of things? If you're getting all these kinds of notifications within your, bank system, I'm assuming at some point, if not already, some, AI systems are going to be able to notice whether something looks like a fraud based on like the biometrics that you were talking about before, or other types of data that shows, oh, well, this is a little bit off. Now I'm assuming what happens now is, like my card gets blocked all the time because, I do some support for my clients, and it's like, oh, well, this is a different kind of thing, so it's blocked, so I have to phone the bank. It's like, oh, our system flagged this as a potential fraud thing. Talk to a human being, get it unblocked. I'm assuming here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that at some point those humans might not be kept in the loop if there's a AI that's, significantly powerful and nuanced enough to understand, my personal data, what I've been doing, or do you always want to have a human there to do the final check?
I mean, so banks are beginning to invest in AI, and some of the vendors who supply bank fraud defense systems have had. I've worked with firms that had AI patents expire. So you're talking 25 years plus use of artificial intelligence. So it's not a new thing. But I mean, the basics really with bank fraud defense systems start with transaction data. So it might be a larger than normal transaction going to a beneficiary that's new. You might then look at, okay, we need to supplement that because that's going to lead to a lot of false positives. False positive being blocking genuine transactions rather than stopping. So you might say, okay, what else can we do with that? And you might say, well, let's develop a bit of a model that looks for people who are more likely to be victims of scams. So you might then have used quite a big sort of pool of data to develop a more sophisticated model that gives you a score that says, okay, these customers are more likely to fall victims of scams. So therefore, somebody with a new high value payment to a new beneficiary who scores high on our scam victim model, let's stop those guys. And you can get all the data as well. So banks are starting to now look at, okay, when the customer made the payments, was a phone call going on the device at the same time, which is indication that someone was coaching them through the payments. You can do these kind of things. So the banks have got to start to think about lots and lots of data points. Most of it now non-monetary, as they call it. In the old days, it used to just be simple, large value payment to a new beneficiary. Let's have a look. These days, it's going to be all these different data points. And the way to make that kind of fraud risk model more accurate is to use a massive data set. And that might then mean that you're going to expose it to, say, machine learning, artificial intelligence, to help you develop a more and more accurate model. So in a kind of traditional model using traditional tools might be, say, able to detect fraud at a rate of, let's say, 10 to 1, false positive, fraud to genuine. And that's a decent trade-off for a bank. But using AI and machine learning, you might be able to get a false positive down to, say, 1.2 to 1 or something like that. So really accurate. But the problem is it might only spot one fraud a week, whereas the other model might spot 50 frauds a week. So I have a lot more alerts, but it's so accurate. Any alerts once a week, you spot one fraud, and it's definitely fraud. That's brilliant. But what that says is you need about 50 of those models to AI models, and it might take 6 months to train a model and then deploy it and make sure it works. That's 6 to 9 months. So banks are starting to think, okay, well, I'm going to need multiple models developed at speed, and when they stop working, I need to be able to retire them quickly. So the challenge now for banks is a bit of an arms race for how quickly they can develop multiple models for use. So loads and loads of technology being used in banks, particularly in the UK, and biometrics, faces, voices, devices, all of that stuff is vital. And I suppose to give you the insight for consumers, Mark, your bank should not be phoning you saying, hi, I'm calling from, Bank of Montreal. Can you give me your last 3 digits of your postcode and your month and year of birth, please, Mark? And your bank, I'll just put the phone down.
Yeah.
Put the phone down. If they really want to get hold of you, they'll write to you. If you're really curious about what it might be, phone your bank on the number you know is genuine and ask to, speak to the fraud team. Whichever department they said they were from, just phone back. But whilst banks still send, one-time passcodes via SMS or phone you up and ask you for, that kind of data, it's just really insecure. And the future is go into your mobile app. The bank can see you. They've got your face print, your voice print on their in their data, not using Apple's or or Samsung's. So banks that are smart are now investing in faces, voices, and devices and creating an identity vault. They'll know your IP address. They'll know which country you're in, geolocation down to where you are. They know if you're using other devices. So almost the worst nightmare I had as a fraud manager once was just people using VPNs. They thought they were secure. And it's like, I wanted my customers to not use a VPN because I want to make sure it's you. So, VPNs tend to get sold by VPN providers saying it's some kind of security thing. And actually what you're doing is putting a cloak between you and the bank. And if you think about the thing that we are most worried about as a society would be in terms of scams and security, would be losing our money. And the criminals want your bank account, your money. So don't use a VPN. Let the bank see it's you coming from your device, coming from your IP address, either home or work. Be predictable. So that banks will look for that predictability pattern. And when you say get a new phone, they'll think, oh, never seen this phone before. Let's check it's not on a blacklist of known bad phones. No, it's not. Let's check it's not been jailbroken. No, it's not. Okay, let's do one more thing. Let's check it's Mark. Mark, please look at the phone. Let's scan your face. That is much more secure than not doing it, or, I don't know, send you an email. So banks need to change the behavior, and technology can be used for really secure methods. And again, one of the things that might improve your fraud score if you were on your banking app, it might be don't use a VPN. So it's amazing, some of it we're told, it's like sort of, snake oil. Buy a VPN, it's going to save your life. Actually, what you're scared of, I'm scared of scams and fraud. VPN's probably going to make you harder to identify with your bank. Why do you want to make that the case?
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, those are some, I guess, practical tools that people can take away from the podcast, which is always great. I see there's just a couple minutes left here. Maybe the last question, which you already touched on a little bit in the last point here, but like, where do you see the future going? Do you see more scammers using more technology and more banks using more technology, and there's just a forever arms race that gets more sophisticated? Is there ever going to be an end to this potential scamming world, or is it just going to continue as is with, as I said, more sophisticated tools?
I'm afraid to say with 20, 30 odd years working fraud, it's going to continue. You can expect new scams. I think the good news is you're going to see banks moving away from SMS and one-time passcodes and silly phone calls asking you to give them information when you don't know who it is. You're going to see more secure handshakes between bank and customer, which will be two-way. So you should really demand and expect your bank to, how do I know it's you? You tell me. Beware of unsolicited phone calls pretending to be the bank. You've just phoned me. I wasn't expecting you. Now you're asking for the postcode. You've got to be kidding. So that kind of pressure needs to come from consumers. And I think you'll see, banks adopting, biometrics, gamification to try to help educate people using technology to zero in on the transactions that are more likely to be scams. But the key thing, back to one of your points before, Mark, is, the bank was concerned that I work for was concerned Mark might be being scammed and you've hit the score. I'm concerned about the value. It's a new beneficiary. What are you doing? That conversation with you, the most effective way you can do it is by voice. So, having a human being from your bank, as long as you're certain it's them, and that's the key, how the banks and customers prove certainty. But once that challenge has been overcome, a human being speaking on a one-on-one like this is the best way of defeating talking somebody down from the ledge they're about to jump off, So technology can be used to really zero in on the victims, but the human voice is the most powerful thing that can be done. So I think as customers of banks, we can expect to see more use of technology. And in terms of scams, I think anything and everything. The one thing that does worry me is, some scammers were state tolerated, let's call it, particularly in Russia. Now, I think they're actually almost state sponsored, encouraged to take money out of Western economies, almost like a revenge for sanctions. And, if Russians have been mapping subsea cables, communication cables around the UK recently, for example. So you've got this kind of cyber war that's heating up. And, for me, it's kind of, you can expect to see, ongoing attacks from scammers, state-sponsored, sophisticated, more use of technology. And that's just going to continue. So I think that then they'll feel more plausible. So I think banks, if they can secure that communication with clients and make it a two-way thing, and if they can start to use technology to help them identify scams more accurately, consumers are going to start thinking, okay, I know it's my bank, and I know they're not going to stop me just for some random reason. I better engage with that. So I think we can expect to see more accurate scam prevention, but we're going to see some novel scams, and we're going to see some large-scale stuff, and it may well coincide with, I don't know, some of the geopolitical things we're seeing. So if you see a war break out or expand and it affects a Western country, you can expect scammers will be jumping all over that, trying to take advantage of the latest news story. So yeah, I think it's just be cautious and use whatever controls you can. If your bank, go into your banking app, actually, I'd say to the listeners of this podcast. In the UK now, you can go into your banking app and I can look at it and I can reduce the payment limits on my account. And I would say it's the one most powerful thing you can do. And a friend of mine did it, and I showed him what to do. And he actually had mobile banking app on his mother's account who was 90. A 90-year-old lady had the ability from HSBC to send £100,000 payments instantly. So straight away, he was able to reduce that payment limit to £5,000. Now, that's the kind of thing that might save his mum from losing her life savings. And that's the kind of thing. The bank had created the technology. So if you listen to this, check if you've got that on your mobile app. Because HSBC had gone to all the trouble of creating it, and then they didn't tell anybody it was there. Which is like, the head's like,
Yeah. Massive facepalm moment.
Yeah, engage with your bank and listen to what they're saying. And if there's a way of improving your own security, just be proactive about stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a good place to stop. We've got some real practical knowledge about how to think about not just now, but also in the coming years, and especially if it's not going to change, if it's only going to get more sophisticated, more complicated, then to me it sounds like we can't rely on technology to solve our problems in this scenario, anyways. So be a little bit more aware, and don't. Honestly, for me, the most interesting, not the most interesting, but the most relevant point here is if there's, a family crisis, now I'm aware that, I might be targeted or my family members might be targeted. I hadn't thought about that before, but it makes perfect sense. So hopefully one person listens to this and thinks about that and, stops extra pain.
If they listen to this, they're the most informed person in their family network. So go and sit down with mom and dad. Just go and sit down with them and talk to them because they'll listen to you. So that's a great place to stop, I think.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Jason. Where can people reach out to you? We'll have your LinkedIn up, of course, but where are some other places that people can reach out or follow what you're doing?
Well, LinkedIn's the main place, really, if people want to, contact me. I've got my own website and fraud consultancy called javloc.com, so javloc.com. And we offer sort of tailored advice to companies on fraud prevention. So, and I've written a few blogs that might be quite useful for people listening to this. They can read. So have a look at javloc.com or look me up on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Jason. Informative and practical episodes, which is always something that I like to have on the podcast. So thanks again for your time.
Welcome.
Well, thanks for listening to this week's Future Tech and Foresight podcast. If you like what you've heard here, there are, of course, a number of ways that you can support the podcast. The best way would be to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or give a rating on Spotify, which you can find a step-by-step explanation for on the futuretechandforesight.com website. Alternatively, feel free to leave a comment either on the episode show notes or the YouTube channel where you can see video recordings of the interviews. And finally, if you are part of an organization that is aware of the disruptive and transformational impact that emerging and future technologies will bring and want to know more, Please get in touch to hear about the strategic foresight services that we offer and how we can help future-proof your organization and take advantage of the phenomenal opportunities available to survive and thrive in the future.
A lot of future-shocked people and future-shocked institutions in our society are simply overwhelmed.
Once there is superintelligence, the fate of humanity may depend on what the superintelligence does.
Science fact is catching up to science fiction.
The first truly intelligent machine will be the last invention that humanity needs to make.
The only scarcity that will exist in the future is that which we decide to create ourselves as humans.
Within a 10-year design revolution, we can have all humanity living the highest standard of living anybody's ever known.
Progress is accelerating at an exponential pace, and it's going to reach a point where progress is so fast it's going to be a singularity.
We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens.
Every single headline points to the birth pangs of a Type 1 civilization.